The Harrington estate sat like a jewel in the quiet suburb of Ashwood, a sprawling brick home with manicured lawns, flower beds in perfect symmetry, and a driveway that gleamed under the evening lights. To outsiders, the Harrington family seemed flawless. James Harrington, the patriarch, a self-made businessman admired by colleagues. Eleanor, his elegant wife, whose charm and poise concealed a mind that always measured every move, and their two children, Michael and Claire, young adults on the verge of careers that promised success. Add Aunt Vivian, the gentle yet observant matriarchal figure, and it seemed as if the Harringtons had everything a family could desire. But perfection has a way of hiding the rot beneath. It began innocuously one Friday evening when the family gathered in the grand dining room to celebrate James's recent promotion. Crystal glasses reflected the soft glow of chandeliers as wine poured and laughter filled the room. Claire, restless in her chair, teased Michael about his constant focus on work over family. Michael snapped, his voice sharp, startling Eleanor. She shot him a glance that silenced him immediately, her lips pressed tightly in disapproval. At first, it seemed like typical sibling tension, but Detective Laura Bennett, who would later remark on her first visit, would notice how even in moments of laughter, something always lingered like a shadow over them. Dinner progressed, but the atmosphere grew heavier as subtle glances exchanged around the table spoke volumes. Michael avoided looking at his father directly. Eleanor's smiles didn't reach her eyes. Claire fiddled nervously with her necklace. Aunt Vivian sat silently, her fingers drumming softly on the table. Later, after dessert, James excused himself to his study, a stately room lined with books and family portraits. He was never seen leaving again alive. The next hour would unravel the image of the Harrington family forever. A scream tore through the house. Eleanor had found him. Blood splattered across the polished floor, the sharp metallic scent choking the air. James's body lay sprawled across the oriental rug, his eyes wide in frozen horror. Panic seized Eleanor's throat. Michael and Claire rushed in, but it was too late. Aunt Vivian, standing at the doorway, looked on, calm but calculating, as if she had expected this moment all along. Neighbors called the police. The media would later describe it as a shocking murder in an affluent neighborhood, an unimaginable tragedy behind the facade of suburban bliss. Yet Detective Bennett, arriving at the scene, noticed the anomalies that made this case impossible to categorize as a simple robbery or burglary. Doors were locked from inside, no signs of forced entry. Valuable items were untouched. Whoever killed James Harrington had been inside the family already. As the investigation began, the cracks in the family's facade started to appear. Claire claimed she had been in the kitchen tidying dishes. Michael insisted he had been checking on the garden. Eleanor's story shifted. First, she had been upstairs in her bedroom. Then she said she had been speaking to James in the hall. Aunt Vivian remained an enigma, quietly stating she had been in her room reading. Every story seemed plausible at first, but small details didn't align. Even the staff, maid, gardener, and driver were perplexed. None had seen anyone enter or leave the house that night. Detective Bennett's instincts told her something crucial. The killer wasn't just familiar with the house, they knew the family's habits, their schedules, their secrets. The investigation revealed subtle, unsettling behaviors. Michael was seen discarding something in the trash, Eleanor's phone contained suspicious late-night messages, and Claire's diary hinted at deep resentment toward her father. Aunt Vivian, ever observant, asked questions that seemed innocent but struck at the heart of everyone's guilt. Every moment in the house became charged with tension. Every glance was a potential accusation. Outside the Harrington estate, whispers began to circulate. Neighbors wondered how a family so perfect could produce such horror. Journalists described the scene in grim detail: bloodstains on the carpet, the shattered sense of security, the echo of screams that would haunt the neighborhood for weeks. The Harringtons, who once hosted elegant parties and garden gatherings, now lived under the cloud of suspicion. Inside the house, fear festered. Michael and Claire avoided each other's gaze. Eleanor wandered from room to room, her thoughts a whirlpool of grief and panic. Aunt Vivian, calm on the surface, quietly observed every interaction, storing away each fragment of truth. Detective Bennett, reviewing the scene, realized that while the murder itself was violent, the emotional landscape of the family was far more dangerous. Everyone was hiding something, and each secret carried a potential motive. As the night deepened, a chilling realization settled over the household. The danger wasn't outside, it was already inside. Every family member was now under suspicion. Every smile, every apology, every defensive gesture became a clue, and the question lingered unspoken yet heavy in the air. Who among them could commit such a brutal act, and why? In that moment, the Harringtons were no longer a family. They were suspects, each trapped in their own web of fear and deception. Detective Bennett's mind raced. This was more than a murder. It was a study of human fragility, resentment, and betrayal. Each person had their own reason to hurt James, but only one could cross the line. And as she looked at the silent, elegant aunt standing by the doorway, the detective knew the game had only just begun. By morning, the neighborhood buzzed with curiosity and fear. News crews arrived, cameras flashing, as reporters speculated about the motives. The Harrington estate, once a symbol of success and harmony, became a stage of suspicion, whispers, and dread. Detective Bennett stood firm, understanding that the answers would not come easily. Every smile hid a secret, every glance a potential lie, and every heartbeat could belong to the killer. The first part of the story ends here, leaving the audience with a chilling thought. In a house where love once thrived, murder had already planted its seed. And as the sun rose over Ashwood, the Harrington family would begin the long, torturous descent into suspicion, betrayal, and the unrelenting truth. Sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who knows you best. The morning after James Harrington's murder brought no relief, only a heavier weight of unease. The Harrington estate, once a sanctuary of elegance and warmth, now felt like a prison. Detective Laura Bennett arrived early, notebook in hand, determined to untangle the web of lies and deceit. The family sat stiffly in the living room, each member a mixture of grief, fear, and something harder to define: guilt. Detective Bennett began with Michael, James's eldest son. His face was pale, his hands twitching whenever he spoke. "I was in the garage," he insisted, though his alibi was unverified. A closer examination of the security footage from the estate's cameras revealed nothing, but subtle details unsettled Bennett. Michael's shoes were muddy, as if he had been outside late at night. He brushed it off nervously, muttering about rain, but the detective noted every hesitation, every forced pause. Claire, James's only daughter, sat with her arms wrapped around herself. She claimed she had been in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, yet crumbs of chocolate were found on her sleeve that didn't match the night's desserts. Bennett made a mental note: small inconsistencies often hide the largest truths. Eleanor, elegant and composed on the surface, seemed more fragile than usual, but beneath her sorrow lurked sharp calculations. Her phone, which she claimed had been off to avoid disturbance, contained late-night messages with a man named Richard. The content hinted at a clandestine relationship, flirtation that crossed lines of loyalty. Bennett filed this carefully. A motive rooted in betrayal and jealousy was emerging. And then there was Aunt Vivian. Quiet, observing, calculating, her calmness was almost unnerving. She answered questions politely, never raising her voice, yet every answer seemed carefully rehearsed. Detective Bennett couldn't shake the feeling that the aunt knew more than she was letting on. Something about the way she watched her family, noting every twitch, every nervous glance, suggested she understood the dynamics at play more deeply than anyone else. As the day unfolded, subtle tensions grew into sharp conflicts. Michael accused Claire of overreacting to minor events. Claire retorted with bitterness about years of feeling invisible under their father's expectations. Eleanor tried to mediate, but every intervention seemed to add fuel to the fire. Aunt Vivian's comments, calm and measured, acted like a scalpel, cutting away pretense while leaving raw nerves exposed. Outside investigators arrived, combing the estate for fingerprints, traces of forced entry, and anything that could point to an intruder. They found nothing. The conclusion became chillingly obvious. The killer had intimate knowledge of the house and the family. This realization spread tension like wildfire. The Harringtons, once bound by blood and loyalty, now found themselves suspects to each other. The first night after the murder introduced even more fear. Strange sounds echoed in the hallways. A floorboard creaked when no one was walking. A shadow flickered against the walls, and a faint whisper of a note slid under Eleanor's bedroom door. It read simply, "Not done yet." Panic gripped the family. The note suggested that the killer was still among them, still active. The detectives began interrogations in earnest. Michael revealed that he had recently borrowed money from his father without permission, an act he had hidden for months. Claire admitted that she resented James for his favoritism toward Michael and for controlling every aspect of their lives. Eleanor's affair was exposed in fragments, though she denied it had anything to do with her husband's death. And Aunt Vivian's will, discovered by Bennett, revealed she had positioned herself as primary beneficiary in case of James's demise, a revelation that added another layer of suspicion. Detective Bennett noticed patterns that would have gone unnoticed by others. Every accusation, every defensive gesture, every tear or flinch told a story. The family's interactions became a minefield. In heated moments, Claire shouted at Michael about his recklessness. Michael lashed back about how Claire had always been the favored child. Eleanor interjected, trying to maintain peace but failing spectacularly. Aunt Vivian, sitting in her armchair, observed silently, her eyes sharp, calculating, unyielding. She said little, but her mere presence seemed to amplify every family conflict. As the investigation deepened, Detective Bennett discovered financial discrepancies. James had been planning to cut off Michael's allowance due to gambling debts. Eleanor stood to gain significantly from a life insurance policy in the event of his death. Aunt Vivian had quietly manipulated James's investments, placing herself in a position of potential wealth if the family fortune shifted. Every discovery added to the sense that James's death was not random, but meticulously orchestrated. Meanwhile, tensions within the household escalated. Claire began secretly recording conversations, convinced that someone in the family was hiding the truth. Michael grew increasingly paranoid, following Eleanor around the house and questioning every interaction. Eleanor, under pressure, started lashing out at small mistakes, her usual composure cracking. And Aunt Vivian, calm yet sharp, seemed to thrive in the growing chaos, her influence subtle but undeniable. Late one evening, the house grew quiet, too quiet. Detective Bennett walked through the hallways, flashlight in hand, noting the eerie silence. It was broken by the sound of glass shattering from the kitchen. The family rushed in. A photo frame of James had been smashed to the floor. Written on the wall in smudged ink were the words, "Everyone knows the truth." Fear gripped the household. Someone had sent a direct message, or worse, the killer was leaving a warning. By the end of Part 2, the Harrington estate had transformed from a sanctuary of wealth and happiness into a pressure cooker of suspicion and mistrust. Each family member had secrets, secrets that could make them appear guilty. Every glance could conceal a lie, every gesture a hidden motive. Detective Bennett knew the killer was watching, waiting, and that the next violent act could happen at any moment. The audience is left hanging on the tension. Who is hiding the most? Who is lying the best? And who among them will strike next? The stage is set for part 3. Betrayal comes to the surface, shocking truths are revealed, and bloodshed escalates as the family's darkest secrets are exposed. The Harrington estate had become a house of whispers, suspicion, and barely contained fear. Each family member moved like a shadow, aware that every word, every gesture could betray them. Detective Laura Bennett had spent days piecing together alibis, reviewing footage, and analyzing subtle behaviors. The threads of deceit were complex, but patterns were beginning to emerge, and the truth, dark, bitter, and impossible to ignore, was ready to unravel. It started with a confession, though not a voluntary one. Claire, the daughter, had been secretly recording conversations, hoping to protect herself from being blamed. One night, she played the recordings for Bennett, trembling as the detective listened. Voices that had once sounded ordinary now revealed layers of resentment, manipulation, and hidden malice. Michael argued heatedly with James about money, but behind the anger was a threat Claire had never noticed before. Michael suggested taking matters into his own hands if his father didn't comply. Eleanor's voice appeared too, pleading, coaxing, her words carefully designed to manipulate both father and son. And then, quietly, Aunt Vivian's voice, cold, measured, seemingly guiding them without ever explicitly saying a word. The recordings confirmed what Bennett had suspected for days. The murder was planned, orchestrated, and driven by more than a single person's greed. But she still didn't know who would ultimately pull the trigger. Tensions escalated during an afternoon confrontation. Detective Bennett gathered the family in the grand living room, determined to observe them under pressure. She began asking questions about the night of the murder. Michael squirmed, glancing at Eleanor. Claire bit her lip, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she tried to maintain her composure, and Aunt Vivian, as always, sat quietly, her gaze steady and unsettling. You all had reasons to be unhappy with James: money, control, resentment, but someone acted on those feelings. Her eyes swept the room, catching subtle reactions: the flinch of Michael's shoulder, Eleanor's narrowed eyes, Claire's quick intake of breath. One of you betrayed the family. One of you took things too far. The room went silent. No one spoke, but silence can be louder than words. Detective Bennett noted the tension, the unspoken accusations bouncing between family members, and in that silence, the truth began to shift. It was Aunt Vivian who broke it, though not with confession, but with revelation. She quietly observed the interactions, noting every movement, every nervous glance, every flinch of guilt. Later, in private, she admitted she had seen the signs: Michael's gambling debts, Eleanor's affair, Claire's simmering resentment. She had manipulated the situation subtly, letting tensions rise, encouraging minor conflicts, and waiting to see who would act first. She was not the one who had killed James, but she had orchestrated everything so that the family's fractures would become impossible to ignore. Bennett realized then that the killer had been someone close, someone with both motive and opportunity. And the pieces fell into place: the shattered photo frame, the threatening note, the careful manipulation of family members. Michael, under stress, finally confessed, but only partially. He admitted planning the murder with Eleanor, driven by desperation and greed. He claimed the plan was to scare James, to force him to give up control of the fortune, but things had spiraled out of control. The revelation sent shockwaves through the household. Claire screamed, Eleanor tried to defend herself, and Aunt Vivian, quiet and precise, revealed the final twist. She had anticipated their betrayal and manipulated evidence to ensure they couldn't cover their tracks. She had never intended to commit the murder herself, but she had created an environment where the truth could no longer be hidden. With this confession came the most violent moment of the evening. Michael, panicked by the pressure and realizing how much evidence was stacked against him, lunged at Claire in desperation. Eleanor tried to intervene, but Michael shoved her aside. The struggle escalated. Furniture toppled, glass shattered, and blood spilled once more. It was chaotic, frenzied, a raw display of desperation and fear. Detective Bennett, trained for moments like this, managed to intervene just in time, restraining Michael and preventing further tragedy. By the end of the night, the family's web of lies had begun to collapse completely. Eleanor, Michael, and Aunt Vivian were all implicated in varying degrees. Eleanor for conspiracy, Michael for the actual act, and Vivian for manipulation and instigation. Claire, though traumatized, emerged as the reluctant witness, her recording serving as the key to unraveling the case. Detective Bennett sat quietly in her car outside the estate, reviewing the events in her mind. The Harrington family, once the epitome of suburban perfection, had become a case study in betrayal and human fragility. She knew the arrest of Michael and the questioning of Eleanor would be only the beginning. The psychological damage within the family would linger far longer than any prison sentence. Inside the house, Aunt Vivian walked the hallways alone, observing the destruction she had orchestrated without shedding a tear. She had proven her dominance, her intelligence, her ability to control outcomes without ever getting directly involved in the crime. The chilling realization for everyone was that some people's cruelty doesn't require direct violence. Manipulation alone can destroy lives just as effectively. By morning, the estate was silent, the storm of the previous night giving way to the cold clarity of truth. The family members had been separated, questioned, and partially detained. Detective Bennett walked through the rooms once more, absorbing the chaos, overturned chairs, scattered papers, the faint smell of blood still lingering in the air. And on the wall where the threatening message had been written, the ink had faded, but its message remained clear. Everyone knows the truth. The events of Part 3 set the stage for the final act. With betrayal revealed, the killer identified, and family secrets exposed, the story moves toward its climax. What remains is the reckoning, the resolution of justice, the consequences of deceit, and the haunting question, can a family ever survive when the bonds of trust have been shattered by greed, manipulation, and murder? The Harrington estate, once a symbol of wealth, warmth, and familial pride, had become a house of shadows. The night of revelations had left the family fractured, their relationships irreparably damaged. Detective Laura Bennett knew that solving the case was only half the battle, bringing closure to the family and exposing the full extent of betrayal would be the true reckoning. Michael Harrington, the eldest son, had been taken into custody after his violent outburst. His confession, recorded and corroborated by Claire's hidden tapes, revealed the horrifying truth. The murder of James was premeditated, born out of greed and resentment. Yet while Michael had pulled the trigger, the roots of the crime ran deeper. Eleanor, his mother, had been complicit, providing advice, encouragement, and opportunities for him to execute the plan. And Aunt Vivian, the seemingly gentle observer, had manipulated every interaction, ensuring the family's weaknesses would be exposed and exploited. The morning after Michael's arrest, Detective Bennett called the family together one last time. The atmosphere was thick with tension, fear, and grief. Eleanor sat silently, her face pale, eyes hollow. Claire's hands trembled as she clutched a blanket, still haunted by the chaos she had witnessed. And Vivian, unnervingly composed, adjusted her shawl as if preparing for a final performance. "Everyone here has played a part in what happened," Bennett began, her voice calm but authoritative. "Some knowingly, some through manipulation, and some by failing to see the danger around you. But the truth will not be hidden, and justice will be served." Eleanor's voice cracked as she tried to justify her actions. "I never wanted him dead. I just wanted control, to protect us from losing everything." Bennett's gaze was steady. "Intentions don't erase the consequences. You encouraged a plan that ended in murder. That is the law." Claire, still shaking, finally spoke. "It was Aunt Vivian. She knew everything. She manipulated us. She made sure this would happen." Vivian's calm demeanor never faltered. She leaned forward slightly, eyes glinting, and whispered, "You all wanted power. I simply guided it to its natural conclusion. The tragedy is that you are all too blind to see the truth about yourselves." Detective Bennett's heart raced, not in fear, but in recognition of the dangerous intelligence in Vivian. She was right. The aunt had not physically killed James, yet her influence had shaped the actions that led to his death. She had become the silent architect of a family's destruction, proving that manipulation can be as lethal as violence. The final confrontation, however, was inevitable. The police escorted Michael into the living room to formally charge him with murder. Eleanor's tears flowed freely as she faced the consequences of her conspiracy. And then Bennett turned to Vivian. "Aunt Vivian, you may not have committed the act yourself, but you orchestrated the circumstances that led to it. The law may see it differently, but morally, you are just as responsible." Vivian's expression remained unshaken. "I did what was necessary. The family was fractured long before James died. I simply removed the illusion of control and let the truth emerge. You may call it guilt, but I call it clarity." Outside, the sun began to rise, illuminating the estate in cold light. The grandeur of the house, its gardens, and its facade of perfection now felt hollow. Inside, the Harrington family was shattered, broken by greed, betrayal, and the realization that trust could no longer exist within these walls. Detective Bennett stayed behind long after the arrests and confessions were complete. She walked through the estate one last time, noting the small, telling details: James's overturned chair in the study, the faint scuff marks on the hallway floor, the shattered photo frames, remnants of a perfect life destroyed. Each room whispered stories of manipulation, lies, and betrayal, leaving Bennett with a sense of unease she would carry long after the case was closed. In the days that followed, the Harrington name became synonymous with tragedy in Ashwood. Newspapers chronicled the murder, the conspiracy, and the psychological unraveling of a family once admired by the community. Interviews revealed the shocking role of Aunt Vivian, though law enforcement could not charge her for murder itself. Her culpability was indirect, moral, psychological, yet her reputation was forever tainted. Eleanor faced trial for conspiracy to commit murder and aiding in the cover-up. Michael awaited sentencing, his young life shattered by greed and impulse. Claire, though traumatized, became a key witness for the prosecution. Her courage helped expose the family's darkest secrets. And Vivian, she remained in the house for a time, an unsettling presence, until the estate was sold. Her influence lingered like a shadow, a chilling reminder that some evils do not need direct action to leave devastation in their wake. As the story closed, Detective Bennett reflected on the tragedy she had witnessed. Families are complex, but some secrets are more dangerous than murder itself. The Harringtons taught me that the most lethal weapon is not a knife or a gun. It is the manipulation of trust, the careful unraveling of bonds that should never be broken. The estate was eventually emptied, sold to strangers who knew nothing of its past, but the Harrington name carried a legacy of warning. Inside the walls, the memories of betrayal, lies, and bloodshed remained etched, invisible yet permanent. And Detective Bennett, walking past the empty windows one last time, felt a chill run down her spine, a final silent echo of the family that had destroyed itself from within. In the end, the moral was undeniable. The most dangerous killers are often those closest to us. They know our weaknesses, our fears, and our secrets, and when pushed, they will exploit them without hesitation. The Harringtons would never be whole again. Trust, once shattered, could not be rebuilt. And in the quiet corners of the estate, the memory of James Harrington lingered, a reminder that appearances can be deadly, and blood is sometimes spilled not by strangers, but by those who claim to love us most.